We are talking the 2005 version of House of Wax. This one is directed by Collet-Serra, who I guess is most notable for directing The Shallows quite recently, and also he directed another kind of popular movie in The Author. It's actually a kind of reimagining, if you like, of an old Vincent Price property of the same name, although story-wise it doesn't have a lot to do with that outside of the concept of waxworks. It has a few recognisable faces. I would suppose most notably is Paris Hilton. She was apparently the first person that was cast, and the rest of the cast were cast to fit with her. And you do have a couple of other recognisable names for genre fans. I would say Jared Padalecki is probably most well known for his role as Sam Winchester in the Supernatural TV show. And you've of course got Alicia Cuthbert, who was Kim Bauer in the hit show 24 with Keith Sutherland. So what's the story? It focuses on this group of friends who are going to a kind of big football match but have to take a detour. Along the way they decide to camp at this kind of seemingly deserted area. Unbeknownst to them, it's actually next door to this kind of small town which has this House of Wax kind of attraction. And there may be something in there, someone in there who is doing some things that they shouldn't to make the most realistic kind of waxworks you can imagine. Of course, our bunch of protagonists come afoul of this presence. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So this is a relatively kind of high budget movie that actually somewhat bombed upon release, although it's kind of garnered a little bit more of a following as time has gone on. And to be fair, it's not a bad film. What can we say that works, first of all, in this film? You can see the budget. It's obviously quite a... I mean, we're not talking mega blockbuster here, but it's obviously had a decent amount of money spent on it. You know, far more than I would say probably the average horror film. And it does show in the production design, particularly when you actually go into the House of Wax itself. Now, the concept here, it is a literal House of Wax, a house which is actually made of wax and everything in there, including the furnishings and all the figurines and stuff, obviously all made of wax. And there is some fantastic kind of, set design and kind of location shooting here that really kind of make this really creepy as we kind of go into the basement. There's all kind of waxworks faces on the walls, and you realise the extent of the kind of the people that have lost their lives and been made into kind of like waxworks. It's pretty gruesome as well, and we have some quite gruesome deaths. I won't kind of spoil anything for you here, but nonetheless there is some fairly kind of good gore on display here. It doesn't kind of wince away, and there's also, I would say, one particular death which is very kind of drawn out and sort of particularly kind of painful and kind of tragic, to be quite honest. I think the acting here is all good, with maybe the exception of Paris Hilton, to be honest with you, but the other actors I think do a decent enough job here of making kind of likeable characters. In particular, the guy who plays Alicia Cuthbert's brother ultimately is comes across as a bit unlikable initially, but he obviously redeems himself as the movie kind of goes on. It takes a little while to get going, but I think once it does, probably about the kind of the 50-minute mark, at that point, then it kind of really never lets up and has a great kind of sense of tension and basically growing kind of fear about the scale of kind of what's gone on. The special effects, I think, are all excellent, and it doesn't kind of hold back too much on the violence. What doesn't work for me, it does take a little bit of time to get going. As I said, we don't really get anything happening too macabre until about the 50-minute mark. So it's a reasonable amount of time to wait until we actually get a kill on screen. Apparently there was actually a scene which was omitted, which actually had a kind of a prologue victim, if you like, that was cut for kind of timing, but I actually think it would have benefited from being in, because I think you do have to wait a little bit of time to really kind of see anything too kind of horrific. I have to say, although as fun as this movie is, it does fall into some very kind of obvious cliches. You know exactly who's going to die. There's not any surprises in regards to who's going to die and who's going to live, and it does kind of follow some tried and tested tropes in regards to the kind of the character types as well. Paris Hilton, of course, being the kind of the slutty girl. You've got the kind of like the dorky guy, the kind of the football player guy. They're all there, you know. Alicia Cuthbert's obviously the good girl. So yes, there's some very kind of obvious kind of stereotypes in regards to the characters. And speaking of characters, as I've mentioned already, Paris Hilton does struggle with some of the kind of the acting here. Now, to be fair, she doesn't have a huge amount of screen time. The movie doesn't really focus on her at all, really. And she doesn't get a huge amount of actual dialogue scenes when she is on screen. But I think those scenes she does struggle with, although when she's kind of being chased around, obviously I think she fares a little bit better. I think there are some concepts here that don't really work. The actual idea of a literal house of wax I think is a little silly and impractical when you consider obviously it's in the sun and things, and how that would just kind of crumble in real life and stuff. It's a little bit silly. I think they needed to have a little bit more showing it had a little bit more of a skeleton behind it, so to speak. There's also a couple of plot points that are introduced that I didn't think were particularly well done. Without kind of spoiling who, the first victim that we see on screen, we see that they're not actually dead once they're kind of covered in wax. They're actually still alive under there. And you know, we don't really know how long that person would survive. Assuming they kind of have their airways cleared, they could potentially survive an amount of time, but again, it's not really addressed about how that's going to, you know, the fate of this person ultimately. I mean, we kind of know ultimately what will happen, but when it happens is anyone's guess. There's also a kind of a twist at the end that I felt was a little bit kind of cheap, and the fate of, there's a revelation about a minor character that kind of is revealed right at the end of the movie, and I'm thinking, where was this character in the rest of the film? It's just been safe to have a little bit of a reveal, the FU moment, as I like to call it, at the end. But to me, it didn't narratively make a huge amount of sense, if you ask me. But overall, this is a fun movie. I enjoyed this one quite a bit, and it's an above-average film, and I don't think it should be lumped in with the kind of like the bad movie kind of buzz that this movie got. I think it won a few Razzies and stuff like that, and it's not bad at all. It's actually quite an enjoyable horror film, and actually I would say probably even an above average one. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.